Hello guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll be covering the first three chapters of class 7th NCERT Geography. Now, the first chapter is about environment. There are at least 5 or 6 important terminologies. The first is environment. If you see the word environment here, the word origin has been clearly given. Environment, if you break the word, environ. En means in, and viron has come from, a French word, viron, right? So viron in turn has come from the French word viron in turn has come from the Sanskrit word vritta. Okay, like varnak, vartul. Okay, so varnak or vrit means circle, viron means circle. So in circle, environment means the area encircling you as a center. Okay, so let's read what the NCERT has to say. From the above conversation, you understand the place, people, things, and nature that surround any living organism, right? So, living organism, human is at the center. It's called environment. Now, it is a combination of two things: the natural and the human-made phenomenon. The natural, it consists of both the biotic and the abiotic, right? The human environment consists of the building, parks, bridges, roads, monuments, industries, right? The naturals are like the atmosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere. We will define each of these in the natural environment. Now, the natural environment, as we have already said, land, water, air, plants, and animal comprise the natural environment. Lithosphere is the solid crust. Atmosphere is the thin layer. Hydrosphere is the water. Importantly, and this is the diagram you must make when you give any examination. It is the biosphere is the region which comprises all these, the lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, where the life is sustained. Okay, so as it is written, it is a narrow zone of earth where the land, water, and air interact with each other to support life. All right, very importantly, when it supports life, then only it's a biosphere. Okay, yeah. So these were the four spheres, or these were the four components of natural environment. Next, we move to what is an ecosystem. Now, ecosystem is, it's written here, all plants and animal and human beings depend on their immediate surrounding. Often there are also interdependence on each other, right? That is, if we talk about the the coral reefs, right? Coral environment, if we talk, so fish, they live inside the coral mounds. The coral mounds acts as a they protect the fish. In turn, they also get food from the fish, right? So protection, food, right? And when the fish dies, it sheds away its skeletons. These skeleton is again used by the in making these corals, the calcium rich corals, right? So this is one of the coral environment. Again, if we talk of another environment, say a big lake where there is lots of planktons. These planktons are eaten by the zooplankton. Zooplanktons are eaten by the small fish. Small fish are eaten by the big fish. And the big fish, it dies, and that bones is again consumed by the bacteria. So it's again a kind of environment in a lake, right? hence there are, excuse me, this is a lake ecosystem. Earlier was a coral ecosystem. So this interaction of the biotic, abiotic component within the biotic component, right, and between the abiotic components is known as, a ecosystem, right? Ecosystem has large rainforests, grasslands, desert, mountains, lakes, river, ocean, and even small pond. Right. So here it is. A good definition is given. It is a system formed by the interaction of living organisms with each other and with the physical and the chemical factors of the environment in which they live, all linked by the transfer of energy and materials. The linkage is energy. Without that linkage, without that transfer of energy and material, there is no formation of ecosystem. Right. Next we move to the human environment. Early humans adapted themselves to the natural surrounding. They led a simple life and fulfilled their requirements from the nature around them. With time, okay, needs grew and became more varied. So it is saying that earlier the human beings, they didn't change the natural environment very much, but now the human beings, they have understood and how to change the environment, how to make use of things around them, and their needs have grown. Right, the early mans didn't had so much needs, and hence we have changed our natural environment to a large extent, and hence it finally says a perfect balance is necessary between the natural and the human environment. Human must learn to use their environment in a harmonious ways. Right. So very importantly, definitions like biosphere, we learned definitions like ecosystem, right? So ecosystem, biosphere were the two important, things what we understood here, right? Next we move to chapter 2, that is inside our earth. So inside our earth, it is clearly given. Let's move to interior of earth. So it says that the earth's interior is like an onion peel. The first layer, which is known as the crust, is roughly around 35 kilometers, and moreover the crust again is divided into two parts. The upper part, or the continental part, has predominantly sialic layer, that is the composition is silica and aluminium. The lower part, the compositionally, it's SEMA, that is silicon and magnesium, right? So roughly 35 kilometers. The next layer is mantle, depth of up to a depth of 2900 kilometers below the crust, and the innermost layer is the core with a radius of about 3500 kilometers. It is mainly made up of nickel and iron and is called Nephe. The central core has a very high temperature and pressure, right? So this is what crust is: 35 kilometers, comprising of 1% of the volume by Earth, right? The mantle is 2900 kilometers, comprising 84% of the volume of Earth, and the core is 15% by the volume of Earth, right? So mantle is the most voluminous. All right. So next, if we move to rocks and minerals. By the way, the nickel and iron is what is core is made up of, and has a very high temperature, right? Nickel and iron in the core. Very interestingly, rocks and minerals, if we come to the word origins here, it was very interesting to know that the word igneous has come from the Latin word ignis, which in turn has come from the Sanskrit word agni. So agni means fire. The reason we'll discuss just now, sedimentary has come from the Latin word sedimentum, means settle down, which in turn has come from the Sanskrit word siddhati. Okay, siddhati means to settle down, right? Similarly, the word metamorphose, the word metamorphose had again come from, meaning change of form. So the word change, meta, has come from the Sanskrit word me or madhya. Madhya means in the middle, and morphos means has come from the murti. So murti means form. So change in form or in the middle of the form. It has not come to a form, right? Rocks and minerals. What is rock? It's a natural mass of the mineral matter that makes up the Earth's crust is called rock. Rock can be of different color, size, and texture. There are three major types of rocks: the igneous rocks, sedimentary, and the metamorphic. Igneous rocks are primary rocks because they form by the cooling of the magma. And there are two types of igneous rocks: intrusive and extrusive. Intrusive rocks, when the lava cools down, these are called the intrusive rocks because since the cooling of lava, since it's intrusive inside the earth, it takes lots of time to cool down, and hence the grains are the big. On the other hand, the extrusive rocks, uh, since it cools very fast, because it's above the land and it cools very fast, the grains are very very small, right, in extrusive rocks. For example, the basalt. Basalt is an extrusive rock, and whole of the Deccan Plateau in India is formed from the basalt. Okay. Sometimes the molten magma cools down deep inside the Earth's crust. Solid rocks, intrusive, igneous rocks, which is what we have discussed. All right. Rocks roll down, crack, and hit each other are known as sediments. We know what is the sedimentary rocks. And they also contain fossils, right? Very importantly. And finally, metamorphic rocks under great heat and pressure. Clay changes into slate and limestone into marble. Yes, very important. Yes, this was quite interesting. The Taj Mahal is made up of metamorphic rock, and the Red Fort is made up of a sedimentary rock. So it's a red sandstone, right? Yes, one rock changes to another rock, certain conditions. This process of transformation of rock from one into another is known as rock cycle, right? So sedimentary rock changing into metamorphic rock, into magma, into igneous, again into sediments, right? So minerals are naturally occurring. Rocks are made up of different minerals. So what are minerals? Minerals are naturally occurring substances which have certain physical properties and definite chemical composition, right? Yes. Okay, so let's summarize. In chapter 1, we learned about two definitions, one of ecosystem, one of biosphere. In chapter 2, we learned, first about the interior of Earth. We learned that mantle, its depth is around 2900 up to 2900 kilometer, and the complete radius of Earth is roughly around 6400 kilometers, and the radius of core is around 3500 kilometers, right? So even though the even the core, the radius of core is greater, still the mantle occupies 85% of the volume. 15% is only occupied by the core and 1% by the crust. We learned about its composition, then we moved to rocks. We saw how the igneous rocks, the intrusive igneous rocks and the extrusive igneous rocks, examples were the granite for the intrusive. You can learn the example of granite for intrusive. Granite having great grains, right? The great size of the grains, right? Basalt is for the extrusive. By the way, you know, good example is given. Grinding stones used to prepare paste powder of spices are made of granite, right? So yeah, a beautiful example of Red Fort and Taj we saw. And yes, right. Now let's move to chapter 3, Our Changing Earth. Now, first of all, lithosphere is broken into number of plates known as lithospheric plates. And yeah, these lithospheric plates, they move because of the movement of the magma. And why does magma move? Magma moves because number of reasons. For example, the radioactive decay and others also. Now, the Earth's movement can be classified into basically two parts, right? The endogenetic movement and the exogenetic forces. The endogenetic forces, the Earth movement, you know, can be classified into two parts: the endogenetic forces and the because of exogenetic forces. Now, the endogenetic forces can be classified into two parts: diastrophic forces and catastrophic forces. The diastrophic forces, they build mountains, right? The catastrophic forces are because like earthquake, volcano, landslides, etc. Exogenetic forces are both erosional and the depositional. For example, the rain, river, wind, sea waves, and the glaciers, right? The you know the sudden movements like earthquake and volcanoes cause mass destruction. We have already seen. Okay, volcano is a vent in the Earth's crust through which molten material erupts suddenly. Right? Vent. It's an opening. Now, very interestingly, endogenetic, exogenetic. If you see the word genetic, it has come from the Sanskrit word janan. Janan. Janan means birth, right? So jan is the root word. Jantu. Other words include like progeny, genes, genetic have all come from the same root, Sanskrit word jan. Okay, and the word endo, if you see here, it's clearly written. Endo has we also use in like under means inside, right? External, exo, outside. Okay. Yes, so these are important terms. Both volcanoes and the earthquake, these are catastrophic forces which causes the Earth's movement, right? Next, if we move to the exogenetic forces, like the landscape, we'll see one by one what are the landscape these exogenetic forces form, like river, wind, sea waves, and glaciers. Okay, one by one. But before that, we'll see what is the difference between weathering and erosion. Weathering is the breaking of the rocks. Okay, there are the agents of weathering are like the physical weathering, the chemical weathering, the biological weathering. Biological weathering, the agents are the roots. Physical weathering, the agents are like the wind, water. Then the chemical weathering, for example, when it rains, the acid rain causes the chemical leaching, etc., right? So these are weathering. Erosion is the wearing away of landscape. Okay, so weathering is just, breaking. The rocks broke, but when it was displaced, the broken rock when displaced, we call it erosion. Okay, so weathering plus displacement is erosion. Okay, erosion is the weathering away of the landscape by different agents like water, wind, and ice. The eroded material is carried away or transported by water, wind, and eventually deposited. This process of erosion and deposition create different landforms on the surface of Earth. Right. Next, we move to some of the agents like work of a river. The running water in the river erodes the landscape when the river tumbles at a steep angle over very hard rocks or down a steep valley side. It forms a waterfall. So the condition is very hard rock. Next. So this was the upper stage of river. In the middle stage, we find, or when a river reaches the plains, we find meandering of the river, the twists and turns. Due to its continuous erosion and deposition, we also find oxbow lake. So here you find oxbow lake, right? And many a times, at times river overflows its banks. This leads to the flooding of the neighboring areas. As it floods, it deposits layer of fine soil and other material called sediments along its bank. This leads to formation of a flat fertile floodplain. Okay, the raised banks are called levees. Okay, so these are the natural embankment, right, called levees. As the river approaches the sea, the speed of the flowing water decreases and the river begins to break up into a number of streams called distributaries. The river becomes so slow that it begins to deposit its load. Each distributary forms its own mouth. The collection of sediments form all the mouths form a delta, right? Okay, so if we see the work of a river, the in the upper reaches it forms waterfall, right? In the plains it forms meanders, oxbow lake, floodplains, and the levees. And during its mouth or the end stage it forms delta, right? Next we move to the work of the sea waves. The erosion and deposition of the sea wave gives rise to coastal landforms. The sea waves continuously strike at the rocks, cracks develop. Over time they become larger and wider. Thus, yeah. So these hollow-like caves are formed on the rocks. These are called sea caves, right? They become larger and wider. These hollow-like caves are formed on the rocks. These are called sea caves, okay? As these cavities become bigger and bigger, only the roof of the caves remain, thus forming sea arches. Yeah. The caves keeps on, increasing in its size, and a sea arch is formed, right? Further breaking the roofs, it goes on, right? It goes on, and these wall-like features are called stacks. The steep rock coast rising almost vertically above the seawater is called sea cliff. The sea waves deposit sediment along the shore, forming sea beaches. Okay, so there are three erosional works of the river and one depositional. So the erosional work of the river starts from the sea cave. The next stage is formation of sea arch. The next stage is the formation of stacks. Okay, the depositional work is the sea waves deposit sediments along the shores, forming sea beaches. Next, we move to the glaciers. Glaciers are the rivers of ice, which too erode the landscape by bulldozing the soil and stores, exposing the solid rock below. Glaciers carve out the deep hollows. As the ice melts, they get filled up with the water and become beautiful lakes in the mountains. Okay. So, but the material is carried by the glaciers, such as the rocks, big and small, and sand and silt gets deposited. These deposits form the glacial mountains. Okay. So, starting with work of river, work of sea waves in the ice, we learned that glaciers are the icy rivers. They erode the land below it, and when the glaciers melt, a lake is formed. Else, the water would have escaped out. The only reason lake is formed because the glaciers have been, cutting through. The material carried by the glaciers, such as the rock, big and small, sand and silt, gets deposited. These deposits form glacial moraines. Very important. Next, we move to the work of wind. An active agent of erosion and deposition in desert is wind. Very important. Normally, we see mushrooming of rocks. The winds erode the lower section of the rocks more than the upper part. And the reason it does is because the winds, the abrasive action of the wind is most up till a height of 3 to 4 feet, right? This abrasion causes the rocks which are above it not to get eroded, forming a pedestal like feature, right, known as mushrooms rocks, right? So abrasive action is not there, hence we form mushroom rocks. When it stops blowing, the sand falls get deposited in low hill structure. These are called the sand dunes. When the such sand is deposited in large area, it's called Levees. Okay, so one we find here is Levees. Don't confuse Levees with Levees. Levees are found in floodplains by rivers. Levees are work of wind. Okay, large deposit of loess is found in China. Taklamakan desert is there. All right, so let's summarize. It would be better if we summarize with this chart. So the lithosphere is broken into number of plates known as lithospheric plate. Now this figure is very important. The chart which you see is very important. The Earth's movement can be, the parts can be because of two things: the endogenetic force and exogenetic forces. The sudden forces, the earthquake, volcano, right? These are the sudden forces. Or you can also say catastrophic forces. The diastrophic forces are the mountain building forces. Next is the exogenic forces. These are erosional as well as depositional. Let's see the landforms made by the rivers. The river landforms in the upper reacher, it starts with the waterfall because of the hard rocks. Next is the wind. The wind forms like in desert it forms like mushroom rocks. Then it forms Levees, not to be confused with Levees. So Levees also found in largely in China, and also sand dunes. Sand dune is a depositional work, same as the Levees. Have we discussed the rivers? River. It starts with, in the upper reacher. It starts with the waterfall. Then when it river reaches plains, we find meanders. Then Oxbow Lake. It deposits floodplains, and levees are the natural embankment formed after a deposition of they form as a natural barrier to the flow of river or to the floods, right? Levees. Sea waves, yes, sea waves was very important. First starting with the sea caves, then sea arches, then stacks, right? So these are the three levels, and the depositional work include the formation of the coast, the seashores. Yeah. And one more important thing was about the sea, is the sea wave deposit along forming, yes, sea cliff, a steep rocky coast rising almost vertically above the seawater is called sea cliff. This also was important, not to be left anything. And finally, glaciers. Glaciers, there are two things. First of all, what is glacier? It is a river of ice. It is, first of all, glacier erodes where it stands, and hence when it melts, a lake is formed. And secondly, the depositional work of glacier forms moraines, right? All right. Okay, apart from these, the difference between the erosion and the weathering was important, which we already discussed, right? And finally, one do you know fact: thousands of small waterfalls in the world. The highest waterfall is in Angel Falls in Venezuela, roughly around 980 kilometers. Very interestingly to know, when the water falls here, it falls continuously from such a height that it, upon reaching the ground, it falls as a mist. Okay, and lots of rainbows are formed there. Yeah, South America. Niagara Falls located on the border between Canada and USA, North America, and Victoria Falls, the borders between Zambia and Zimbabwe in Africa. Okay, so that was the three important falls: Angel, Niagara, and Victoria. Okay, so shall we end here? All right.